And I learned early that sometimes the scariest monsters don't hide under beds. They sit at dinner tables and wear your last name. My legs gave out and I fell to my knees. But it didn't hurt, nothing hurt anymore. He knelt beside me, the King of Kings, kneeling in the dirt next to a broken little street kid. But why, I asked, my voice shaking. Why did you let all these bad things happen? Why didn't you stop them? The questions I carried for years finally spilled out. Like a dam breaking, his smile was sad, but full of a love I couldn't understand. When I first read her testimony, I could hardly breathe, let alone hold back my tears. I wanted to reach through the words and embrace this girl who, at such a young age, had survived more than most of us could ever imagine. Her journey was one I thought only existed in movies, and even there, it would have seemed almost too incredible. But here, in every raw, unpolished sentence, was her truth, a story that had carved its way from the shadows of the darkest streets to a light so profound, could warm the hardest hearts. I'll never forget that night in Seattle, standing on a rainy, broken sidewalk, clinging to a scrap of an old blanket. The city was heavy with clouds, and the streets were soaked, cold and gray. Everything around me felt dark and empty, just like me. I looked down at the cracked pavement, feeling like I was one of those tiny fractures, about to break apart completely. I was so alone, lost in a place that swallowed me whole every night. I wasn't born here. My first memories are of a tiny village in Eastern Europe where winters bit harder than wolves, and summers dried everything to dust. We lived in a house that creaked with secrets, the kind of secrets that made Mom cry at night and kept me hiding under thin blankets, trying to become invisible whenever Dad came home. The walls of our house weren't just made of wood. They were made of broken promises and shattered dreams. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still smell the musty air of that house, feel the rough wooden floors under my bare feet, and hear the sound of Mom's muffled sobs. She tried to hide them, but in a house that small, every tear echoed. Dad's anger was like a storm that never passed, and I learned early that sometimes the scariest monsters don't hide under beds. They sit at dinner tables and wear your last name. I remember the day everything changed. I was clutching my favorite stuffed rabbit, a raggedy thing with one eye missing, when the nice lady from the children's services came. There were lots of grown-up words I didn't understand. Then, custody, asylum, humanitarian visa. But I understood enough to know that Mom was sending me away to America to live with a distant aunt we barely knew. For a better life, she whispered, her tears soaking into my hair, as she hugged me goodbye at the airport. That was the last time I saw her. America was supposed to be different, better, but sometimes better is just another word for differently hard. My aunt tried, I'll give her that, but she had her own demons to fight. And within a year, I found myself bounced between foster homes, like a ball nobody wanted to catch. Each new house came with new rules, new disappointments, and new ways to feel unwanted. The streets of Seattle became my real home. At first, it was just for hours at a time, skipping school, wandering aimlessly, trying to outrun the emptiness inside me. Then it became days, weeks. I learned which alleyways were safe to sleep in, which dumpsters behind restaurants would have the freshest leftovers, which strangers to trust and which to run from. I was living in a world no child should know exists, but there I was, another shadow. Among shadows, I found a family of sorts, other lost kids like me. We huddled together for warmth on cold nights, shared whatever food we could find, and protected each other from the dangers that lurked in the darkness. But the streets have their own way of stealing innocence, piece by piece, until you can barely remember who you used to be. That's how I found the powder. It started small, just a little something to help me forget, to make the cold nights feel warmer, to silence the screaming in my head. The older kids said it would help. They said it would make everything better. They lied. December 20th, 2018. The day everything changed. The rain was falling harder than usual. turning the world into a blur of gray and black. I was sitting on a rusty bench, my old blanket pulled tight around my shoulders, staring at the little bag in my trembling hands. I was so tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. The powder promised peace, promised escape, promised everything I thought I needed. I don't remember taking it. I remember the world spinning, remember trying to breathe but finding no air, remember falling into a darkness, deeper than any alley I'd ever hidden in. And then came the visions that would change my life forever. I saw things no child should see, terrible things, beautiful things, things that made me understand why Mom used to pray so hard every night. I saw hell itself, with its flames reaching for me like hungry fingers. I saw faces twisted in eternal regret, heard screams that seemed to come from the depths of time itself. I was falling into an endless pit of darkness, when suddenly light, pure brilliant light, that cut through the darkness, like a knife through paper, and in that light I saw him, Jesus, not like in the pictures they showed us in Sunday school, but real, so real I could almost touch him. His eyes held more love than all the foster homes I'd ever dreamed of finding, more understanding than all the therapists who tried to fix me. When he spoke, his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before, gentle as the lullabies I wished my mother had sung to me, but strong enough to make the darkness tremble. My child, he said, and those two words held more acceptance than all the welcome homes I'd ever received. I've watched you search for love in empty places, trying to fill a heart that was made for something more. Tears streamed down my face as he showed me memories I tried so hard to forget. Sleeping behind dumpsters, stealing food just to survive, huddling with other lost kids for warmth. But this time I saw something different. In each memory, there was a light I hadn't noticed before, a presence I'd been too blind to see. I was there, he said, every single time when you cried yourself to sleep. Behind that grocery store, those weren't just your tears. I cried with you when you shared your last piece of bread. With that younger girl, that wasn't just your kindness. It was mine working through you. My legs gave out and I fell to my knees. But it didn't hurt, nothing hurt anymore. He knelt beside me, the King of Kings kneeling in the dirt, next to a broken little street kid. But why, I asked, my voice shaking. Why did you let all these bad things happen? Why didn't you stop them? The questions I'd carried for years finally spilled out. Like a dam breaking, his smile was sad, but full of a love I couldn't understand sometimes. He said, picking up a handful of dirt and letting it run through his fingers. The most beautiful gardens grow in the darkest soil. Your pain, your struggles, every tear you've cried, I'm gonna use them all through you. Others will find their way home too. Then he did something I'll never forget. He took my small dirty hands in his, hands that had stolen, hands that had hit back when the world hit first, hands that had held that powder, that nearly destroyed me, but when he held them, they became something different, something new. These hands, he said, will help heal others. These feet that ran away so many times will now run to help those in need. This heart that felt so empty will overflow with enough love to change lives. I looked into his eyes and saw not just who I was, but who I could become. Every broken piece of my life suddenly made sense. Not because the pain went away, but because I finally understood it had a purpose. I don't know how, I whispered, feeling smaller than ever, but somehow stronger too. You don't have to know how, he answered, wiping my tears with a touch that felt like sunrise. You just have to be willing. I'll take care of the rest. Then he showed me glimpses of what was to come. Faces of other kids I would help. Moments of joy I couldn't imagine. A future so bright it made my heart ache with hope. Your story, he said, is far from over. And I promise you, the best chapters are yet to be written. When I opened my eyes, I was still on that bench. Rain still falling, world still spinning. But something was different. I was different. The emptiness inside me had been filled with something I couldn't explain, something warm and bright and real. The next few days were the hardest of my life. My body screamed for the powder, but my heart screamed louder for something else. Hope. I found my way to a shelter, where a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands helped me through the worst of it. She didn't ask questions about where I came from, or what I'd done. She just held my hand when the shaking got bad, and wiped my forehead. The fever made me delirious, but the real miracle was yet to come. Weeks later, when I was stronger, the shelter worker helped me look for my family. Any family. And that's when we found her. My mother. She hadn't died, like I'd feared during all those years of silence. She had made it to America too, searching for me all this time, never giving up hope. The day we reunited, in a small office at the social services building, was like a scene from a dream. She looked older, grayer, but her eyes were the same. We ran to each other, both crying, both laughing, both apologizing for things that were never our fault. In that moment, I felt God's plan coming full circle. Every painful step of my journey had led to this moment, this miracle today. I have a home again, a real one with walls that hold love instead of secrets. Mom and I live in a small apartment, and though we don't have much, we have everything that matters. I go to school now, real school, where teachers smile, and kids don't have to pretend to be okay when they're not. But my story doesn't end there. Remember those other kids on the streets, the ones who shared their blankets and their food with me. I go back for them now. Not alone. I work with a youth outreach program. Every weekend, we walk the same streets I used to call home, carrying hot food, warm blankets, and something even more important, hope. Some people say, my story is too dark for a kid to have lived through. Some say it's too miraculous to be real. But I know the truth. Every scar, every tear, every moment of despair, and every burst of joy. I know that sometimes God's greatest miracles don't look like the ones in storybooks. Sometimes they look like a rusty bench in the rain, a kind-hearted shelter worker, or a mother's love that never stops searching. Today, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a victim or a survivor. I see a miracle walking. I see a living proof that no darkness is too deep for God's light to reach. And when I help another kid find their way off the streets, I see that same light beginning to shine in their eyes, too. My name isn't important, my story is. And it isn't over yet, because every day I wake up and choose to be the miracle someone else might need. Every day I choose to believe that if God could find me on that rainy bench in Seattle, He can find anyone anywhere, no matter how lost they feel. And that rusty bench is still there. Sometimes I go sit on it, not to remember the darkness, but to marvel at the light, because that's where my real life began. Not in a forgotten village in Eastern Europe, not in a series of foster homes, but on a cold bench in the rain, where a little girl who thought she was dying found out she was just beginning to live. This is my testimony. This is my truth.